nice. I was just going to warn you about the recording, but please click got it and we'll move on. We'll also be honoring Volvo Trucks North America and Naila Pope Harden, the executive director of the transportation advocacy organization Climate Plan. So the housekeeping items before I turn it over to Chris. The first housekeeping item is that we suggest you use speaker view when we get going in the panel conversation. It's probably going to work a lot better. It's probably available on the top right-hand part of your screen. I'm not sure if you're on a phone or anything where to find it, but use speaker view if you can figure it out. Also, you're able to unmute your mic, but we ask that you keep yourself muted unless you're speaking. We have a staff member, Eric, who is ready to click on you and mute you if you don't do a good job of muting yourself. We prefer that you do it yourself. We use this format where you can actually unmute yourself to make it possible for you to use the chat. And we ask you to go ahead and do that. You can also private message each other in this format. So that's a good benefit from it. And please note that we are recording this event. You just got that notice. And I think we're going to post this onto our website eventually. And so like everything in life nowadays, please don't say or do anything you don't want the whole world to hear or see. I think that's it in terms of housekeeping. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris Chavez, our moderator for today.
Thank you very much, Joe. And it's a pleasure to be here with everybody. So thank you for joining us. So for those of you who are in the transportation space, you know that this is a very exciting, very fast-paced time when it comes to transportation. At the state level, you have the governor proposing massive investments in both the medium and heavy-duty space, as well as the light-duty space, in really moving forward California's transportation strategy, clean transportation strategy, but also centering equity in that proposal. At CARB, the California Air Resources Board, and locally at our air districts, you also see agencies increasingly tackle the emissions that come from the transportation sector and the impacts that it has on local communities. As we know, the transportation sector is responsible for 50% of California's greenhouse gas emissions when you include upstream sources, and 80% of our smog-forming pollutants. Diesel particulate matter is the #1 air toxic contaminant in our air, and it's concentrated in communities near goods movement corridors. And lastly, we've seen massive federal investment as well as we recover from the recession coming from the COVID-19 pandemic. So there is a lot going on in the transportation sector, but there's also a lot in terms of technology, a lot in terms of mode shifting, going away from private vehicles to shared and pooled transportation, a lot more interest in active transportation, which used to be referred to as walking and biking. So there's a lot going on. So I think we can go ahead and kick off our discussion today, and I'll start off with a question with Dan. So based on what we see, Dr. Sperling, are we on the road to a positive future in a shared autonomous mobility?
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to join you. And it's kind of fun to retrospectively look back at what one said and wrote 4 or 5 years ago. I have to say, so the question is, you're asking looking forward to use Joe's metaphor, kind of trite, but I'd say the road forward has potholes, detours, and even possibly roadblocks. And this is a road to a sustainable transportation future. So I'll get into it. Remember, the 3 revolutions that we're talking about are electrification, and I think we're not going to talk much about that. That's on a very good trajectory. That's looking really good. And then the other 2 are automation and shared mobility. So the last 2 are the ones we're going to focus on here. And I'd say that I'm still enthusiastic about this idea of shared automated vehicles. And that was a focus of a lot of the book, is thinking about this paths forward. And I say that because I think shared automated vehicles are really the best chance we have for sustainable mobility once you get beyond electrification. And when I say that sustainable mobility, I mean economic, not only environmental, but economically and social equity from a social and equity perspective. And, kind of the basic premise, as we look at transportation, we've created this very car-centric transportation system in the US. Started in LA, spread to California, spread to the US, and then spread to the rest of the world. But LA is where it started, and it's most ensconced in California for sure. And so, having this very car-centric transportation system marginalizes a lot of people. So people that have access to cars, to high quality, good, easy access, they get a lot of value and a lot of benefit. But then you go and look at people that are have physical disabilities, that are economically disadvantaged, that are just, old and can't see very well. Some of us, as we get older, seeing at night is a challenge, young people. So you start tallying all that up, and it's a significant part of our population. And what we've done is marginalize it. So my hope, my faith in this idea of shared autonomous vehicles is this is a way to serve more people at lower cost. And therefore, it really is the best, I think it is the best hope we have for, certainly for a more equitable transportation system. And it definitely contributes to the environmental and the economic as well. So let me just say a few things. Let me comment on like what's changed since I wrote that book a little over 4 or 5 years ago. As I said, the electric vehicle part of it is pretty much on a really good trajectory. CARB just announced a few days ago our new plan to have to get to 100% in 2035. Europe is doing something similar. China is on a pretty good path. I can't speak for the rest of the US, but we've got a lot of momentum building on electrification, and that's good. And but the rest of it is not so good. The rest of the story here. And that is, if you look at shared mobility offered by like Lyft, Uber, Via, the ridership dropped off a lot. Ridership overall for those so-called TNCs dropped off a lot. But the pooling service, where they carry multiple riders, has disappeared. I think for Lyft and Uber, I think they have not reinstated it anywhere, as far as I know. And they just dropped it. And that was partly because people didn't want to be sitting next to each other and breathing, COVID. But the same kind of part of the same stories with transit. Transit also had lost massive ridership. And so here we have, really the pooling services that we think about really have gone downhill a lot. And then if you look at the automated vehicles part of it, there was a lot of hype when I wrote it, and I was very cautious and said, there is a lot of hype. It's not going to happen as fast as all kinds of people were saying, including CEOs of all kinds of companies. But it seems to be still moving forward at a good pace. The technology seems to be advancing. There's more of an appreciation that getting that last 1% or so is really difficult. The engineers had a little chutzpah, let's say, that they thought they could, make it all work without being sensitive to these, the high threshold that regulators and consumers want for safety. So anyway, that's where we are. So if I just look forward a little bit, I'm still positive. I'm still feeling positive of this future in which we do have shared mobility. And the reason the shared mobility is compelling, in addition, I mean, just to lay it out in real simple terms, is this is a way that you can provide low-cost transportation to lots of people. So, you know, mass transit services are very expensive and serve really very few people. Mass transit serves 2% of our ridership of passenger travel, 2%. And as I laid out, there's a whole lot more than 2% of the population that would really benefit from some kind of public or collective or shared transportation. And so this idea of shared automated vehicles is really promising because it brings down the cost per passenger much lower than what any kind of public transportation, what a conventional legacy transportation system can provide. And it can serve a very broad selection of the population. And it gets all these environmental and economic benefits more broadly. You know, now you don't need so much infrastructure. We don't have to be building all this new road infrastructure. We don't need so much space for parking. You know, it really is good from an urban perspective, urban space perspective, as well as an equity and economic perspective. So, you know, it is going slowly now for those of us that would like to see these services in place. You know, there's, you know, Waymo and Cruise are generally considered the leading companies with the leading technology, and they're both, you know, Waymo, which is Google, was providing shared pooled rides, or at least was providing, I guess they weren't providing shared pooled rides. They were providing riders in their automated vehicles in the Phoenix area and Chandler. They're starting to do that in San Francisco. Cruz is also, and there's a few other companies that are doing well, and then lots of others as well. So it's getting to be a crowded space, you know, and the investment seems to be continuing to pour in, which is a good sign. And but the end of the day, the last comment.
Just doing something about crazy, bro, Mike Tyson.
I don't think that was intended for me.
Yeah, folks, remember to mute yourself, please.
So the last thought, and I think that's Nancy. Well, that's who. And the last thing I'll say is looking at it from a policy perspective. And I think it's really urgent that we do something to reward sharing and pooling. I mean, that includes transit, that includes some of the micro mobility, the bikes and scooters, and policies that discourage single occupant vehicles. And that's really important because it's really good for today's society transportation system, because, you know, that would encourage people to use these other modes and to share and pool. But it also sets the stage for the services that like Cruise and Waymo and others will be bringing forward. And it, you know, because the reality is we do need, people are conservative, they need incentives, and getting these policies in place to disincentivize single occupant vehicles and incentivize everything else, I think is really crucial. And quite frankly, that's where I'm the most discouraged, because I haven't seen any signs of that going forward. There are some nascent things that might lead to it, but pretty much that's where we are. I think once Cruise and Waymo and Zoox and others come up with these pooled shared vehicles, maybe it'll seem more real, and that'll get the policymakers more inspired and motivated. So Prashanthi, we're counting on you. So I think that's that's the lay of the land as I see it.
Well, it's great to hear that you still have a positive outlook on the road ahead. bumps and potholes and detours notwithstanding, because we have gone through quite a bit. And but still, again, hearing that positivity is always helpful. So Prashanthi, if you want to, we'll go on to you. So moving beyond the big picture, we'd love to hear from a company that's actually doing shared autonomous mobility and hear a bit about what this looks like at the local level. A few years ago, we talked to Cruz, where this idea was still in its early stages, but we'd love to see how it's actually being implemented in San Francisco. We'd love to hear how things are going, particularly with your role as you roll out vehicles in such a challenging urban environment. What are some of the challenges and opportunities that you see going forward?
Prashant, can I say one little thing to set it up a little bit more? When I was writing this book, started in about 6 years ago, and I visited Cruz. And when I walked in, they said, "We are doing your vision. We are doing the 3 revolutions. That is our mission, our goal." So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for CCA for having me and having me be able to provide some thoughts as well as join my fellow panelists. It's great to see you again, Dan. And I think we all share that view that to deliver cleaner, more inclusive and safer transportation, we have to work through the principles and pathways that Professor Sperling has just outlined. Sharing, electric, automated, for us, it's self-driving. I believe that Joe had said Cruz is essentially doing that. That is exactly what we're doing. We kind of are synonymous with these 3 revolutions. The industry, along with our stakeholders and partners in the policy space, have made tremendous and steady progress towards these goals. And I'm proud that Cruz is one of the leaders and at the forefront of these efforts. I think the opportunity here to provide a life-saving technology is immense and also incredible. Further, an opportunity to provide and scale a transportation solution for all communities demonstrates the ability to equitably change the way we all get around. And I know that was commented in a few, both from Chris as well as from Dan. In terms of self-driving, we have seen rapid growth in the industry over the last year, with over 4 million miles being driven by autonomous vehicles in California in 2021. That's double what we saw in 2020. Cruz is particularly proud of the accomplishments we've made in this space. We just recently received a deep deployment permit from the CPUC to charge a fare to members of the public with a safety driver. And we've launched our unfared public driverless service in San Francisco this year, a first for the industry. And we utilize our CPUC driverless testing permit, as well as our DMV testing permit to do those things, and submitted our final application for our fared driverless deployment permit to the CPUC in late 2021. That permit will actually unlock our ability to commercially launch in San Francisco by offering a fully driverless service for a fare. And we're really, really excited about that. I do think it's important to note here that we've made these achievements in one of the most challenging cities to drive in the United States, San Francisco. It's 47 times more complex to drive in than a suburban setting. As we move into sort of the shared vehicle platform space, and I know, Dan, you kind of commented on Cruz sort of leading this way here, vehicle sharing is fundamental to how Cruz and our other level 4 operators are approaching this deployment of this technology. The Cruz Origin, which we announced in early 2020, will be that flagship of our commercially deployed fleet and is designed to accommodate up to 6 riders in a shared vehicle platform. There's no driverless console. There's no driver console. You don't see a steering wheel. It is campfire seating. And in terms of our progress on that front, we formally submitted our request to NHTSA to approve the Origin for production, which will enable us to operate these vehicles in a commercial capacity and help make the 3 revolutions a reality. Sustainability and infrastructure is also really important, and that's what I'll last touch upon before I hand over the mic again in today's conversation is Cruz's work leading the industry on electrification and sustainability. We are proud to operate a fully electric fleet today and have been doing so from the beginning. And last year, we actually took a commitment one step further by launching a new initiative called Farm to Fleet, which is a program to power our electric AVs with renewable energy credits generated from family-owned farms in California's Central Valley. We purchased RECs from these farms, creating new streams of revenue for these rural businesses while expanding the positive impact of autonomous electrification to more communities. Cruzs is the first, and I think to my knowledge, only AV company to power its fleets with renewables in California. We called on the rest of the industry to follow our lead on renewable powered AVs through our Clean Mile Challenge last year. And we're pleased that our leadership on this seems to have taken hold. In 2020, only 48% of AV miles driven in California were electric. And then in 2021, that share jumped to 76% of total autonomous mileage. That's not to say that this isn't without challenges, though. To put it bluntly, EV fleets, particularly when operating as a shared service, need a lot of charging infrastructure. In locations like San Francisco, real estate and the available power to install DC fast chargers is limited. And that's why dialogue between cities like San Francisco and the industry are critically important. In order to be able to offer this service to communities that may not otherwise have access to clean miles, we need to create pathways to install more charging stations, both for public use as well as for fleets. So, we've also looked in that, Dan talked a little bit about sort of policy thinking and forward thinking with regards to policy making. We've actually extended this vision to our legislative efforts as well, working with a coalition of environmental activists, labor supporters, and the Union of Concerned Scientists. Cruzs helped deliver California's SB 500 into law last year, a bill to require all fleet operated autonomous vehicles to be fully electric by 2030. So we're really excited about where the industry is, and we're really excited about how we're demonstrating 3 revolutions each and every day. And we can't wait to do that some more as we kind of look towards the year ahead. So back to you, Chris.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for your insights. And it's always great to hear about what's happening on the ground, because we can talk about policy, we can talk about concepts, but when you're seeing a company actually doing something and actually getting it done, it's certainly great to see that. So I think you framed it perfectly when you mentioned SB 500. So I'll turn to Dr. Liu. And as for Coalition for Clean Air, we do a lot of advocacy work. Could you maybe talk a little bit why we support legislation like SB 500, which was mentioned requires all autonomous vehicles be zero emissions by 2030?
Well, yeah, Chris, thanks. I mean, it makes sense, right? I mean, our mission is to, clean the air and protect public health and prevent climate change. And if the future, which clearly those 3 revolutions are happening, right? And Professor Sperling was spot on in his analysis. If that's the way we're going, then they're going to have to be clean vehicles. The automated vehicles are going to have to be clean vehicles. So that I think that it's just common sense. And it's great to see a company like Cruzs embracing that and leading the way and kind of, I think, making others have no other choice, right? I mean, you can do it through legislation, but doing it through a viable business model that shows that it can and will work is really the way to do it. I think, I'm approaching this question of the 3 revolutions in both as an optimist and a pessimist, but I hope as a realist. I mean, I think, I agree 100% with Dan on the EV aspect of it, because those of us who are EV owners are looking like geniuses right now, right? In light of, very high gas prices. And I think that this is the end of the internal combustion engine. I mean, we're really at that tipping point. I mean, it's going to happen in a matter of months where it just doesn't make any sense to do anything else for almost everybody. And things like, the Ford F-150 coming out and all that are a big part of that too. They're going to get to middle America. They got a lot of orders in middle America for those zero emission Ford F-150s. And, Cruzs and others are proving on the glass half full side of things. They're proving that automation can work, and that the technology is there. It's pretty amazing. My own very unofficial and anecdotal survey is that one of my 3 kids doesn't drive and really doesn't want to drive in any way, shape, or form. And good for him. On the glass half empty side of things, I have a 16-year-old daughter who I actually started teaching how to drive last weekend. So I'm feeling kind of guilty, but I'm sure sick of driving her around. That's not the kind of shared mobility we want to talk about. So yeah, I think, she'll be driving soon. Is it good or is it bad? On the glass half empty side of thing, I think Dan's right. The sharing and the pooling is really the real challenge. I think it's very hard, if not impossible, to get people out of their single occupancy vehicles. And in order for it to happen, Dan mentioned carrots and sticks, and I think the sticks have to be kind of extreme. And I'm not sure that we have policymakers in positions to make those decisions, to do things like congestion pricing and bus only lanes and bus rapid transit and taking away parking spaces and really pouring real money into active transportation and those other things that'll get people out of their cars. I'm not sure we have that kind of political leadership. So I'm a little skeptical about that, although, it's really encouraging to hear Prashanthi and Dan talk about how the future can and should look. I can tell you that a lot of it presumes rational decision-making on the part of people, and it doesn't always happen that way. I'll tell you another anecdote. My 16-year-old kid, who's I'm teaching how to drive now, had a swim meet in Santa Monica on a Friday afternoon. And I'm like, I'm not driving. I took my electric bicycle and I rode it to the swim meet, and then I rode it back. They left in the bus, the school bus, the same time that I left on my electric bicycle 17 miles from my house. And I got back first. And I wasn't even using full electricity because my battery only gave me enough. It was 34 miles round trip, so I had to kind of pedal a lot too. But I got back before they did. So how rational is it to, take a car from Santa Monica to south of LAX on a Friday afternoon? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I got back faster than they did. So, I passed up a lot of bumper to bumper Teslas in Santa Monica on the way home. And that's, a problem, because we can't just have zero emission vehicles. We have to have a functional transportation system that goes along with it. So final thoughts, another story from today. I dropped off that 16-year-old kid at school this morning and was driving back 2 lanes. Okay. That's about a 4 or 5 lane wide street. And I'm in the number 1 lane, heading south. There's a kid on a bicycle. I mean, I don't know how old he was, but he was coming across the street, kind of walking his bike across the street, and not even at an intersection. The car in front of me stopped. I stopped, and I looked in my rearview mirror, and I saw this car coming. And this kid just runs right out in front of the car to the right of me. And that car, was moving pretty quick. I don't know when he saw that kid, saw him at the last second, swerved, got around the kid, and didn't kill him. But the kid came really, really close to dying right in front of my face. And it was, when I think of it in terms of the need for automation, and the need for safe routes to school, and a bike lane on that street, it really shook me up. I saw it all happening, and time slowed down, and I almost saw a kid get killed today by a car. This guy swerved and actually went to the inside toward me, and past me, but toward me, swerved around the kid because the kid just ran straight out in front of him. Anyway, it was a scary thing that happened today, and it did definitely reinforce the need for people not having to make those decisions, because automated vehicles will be much better at that. and the safety aspect is truly important. I think kind of that wraps it up. I think that with the absence or the lack of political leaders and decision makers willing to do all those hard things to force people out of their cars, I think that the businesses like Cruz have to prove that they have to lead. They have to prove that it can be done before people will, and those policymakers are going to have the guts to actually do the hard thing. So I'll turn it back over to you, Chris. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Joe. And mentioning about the safety aspect is always important. I know for me, a couple years ago, I was visiting family up in Oregon, and I was in a car behind my aunt and uncle, and we were in Salem in a small residential area. And a guy, as they were crossing the street, a guy was speeding down the road, T-boned them right in front of me, and then ran off with his car barely holding together. So safety is definitely a big aspect of benefit to the three revolutions. So we have some questions from folks already. We have about 4 questions that have been asked so far, and if we need more, I developed a few after listening to our conversation. Certainly feel free to ask them. So our first question comes from Adam Eventov. Would electric, or I'm assuming that's hybrid electric, autonomous vehicles, my apologies, be charged congestion fees that are currently being considered by SCAG? Does somebody, hydrogen electric, thank you for clarifying that. Are there anybody who would like to answer that question? Dr. Sperling, you're muted.
Yeah. What was the question again?
So the question is, would electric or hydrogen electric autonomous vehicles be charged congestion fees currently being considered by SCAG, which is the Southern California Association of Governments?
I don't know the latest details on those plans. I would think, usually the way it's done is like in London, for instance, transit and electric, buses, electric vehicles don't pay the congestion fees. So there's a lot of flexibility in that. And I think part of, a lot of us are really interested in these road user charges because we can use them, in ways we've been talking about. But of course, on the other side, people that are for small government and so on, they look at it, from the other, as a glass half empty. They say, well, if we have road user charges, who knows what they're going to start charging for, after that. And so I think we've got a long ways to go with these road user charges. And, starting with it as a congestion fee, I think is a good thing, but we're going to have to go beyond that into real road user charges, because the revenue from gasoline and diesel cars with the taxes is what pays for all of our transportation, and all that money is going to disappear. So there's going to be a new need for a new source. And so that's the motivation for the road user charge on top of the congestion fees.
Yeah, Chris, if I could jump in here, I part of my life is taken up as a commissioner at the California Transportation Commission, and I showed a real lack of judgment by agreeing to serve as the chair of the Road User Charge Technical Advisory Committee about 3 weeks before the governor announced that all vehicle sales after 2035 would be zero emission vehicles, which will eventually eliminate, like Professor Sperling's saying, eliminate all our gas tax revenue. And once that happens, we're in some serious trouble at the CTC. So we're having this conversation about what it's going to cost, but also about messaging. And the thing of it is that what we want to do first to get that road user charge in place is just tell people we're eliminating the gas tax, right? And you're going to pay a comparable amount with a road user charge. And I hope give people some options on how that is actually collected. I can tell you there's some draft numbers out, and it's about 2.4 cents a mile, and you can do your own math as to how that may affect you. But one of the things it is going to do, it's going to rope in those of us who have electric vehicles who aren't paying that $100 a year, and those who are will no longer. And so, you know, the EV drivers will be paying a higher share than they do now, but it'll be a much more fair share, I think. So I think it should be acceptable to them, and EV drivers tend to be better off financially than those who drive the very old and very poor gas mileage cars, and they'll see a benefit too. Anyway, that said, road user charge is going to be a challenge, but at some point, you're right, it could also be used to try to motivate people to get out of their single occupancy vehicles. But mixing the two up might make it impossible to get it into place in the first place.
The one thing I might add, you know, as we sort of talk about road usage charge and some of the other pieces to that, is when it comes to the autonomous vehicle space is, you know, I think there's no question that everyone wants to pay their own share, but the caution that I would say is to tax too early a burgeoning industry that hasn't quite gotten up off the ground yet. And so I think we want to be mindful of that, and then also ensure that congestion charges or, you know, some road usage charges are also sort of distributed across each and every industry appropriately and equitably. And then we should also think about, from like a policy perspective, for those fleets or for those companies that are also thinking about fleet managed and shared usage, shared spaces, is to have potentially an exemption or caveat or maybe a second tier of what that looks like. Not totally, trying to back away from all charges, of course, but something where it is an incentive versus a disincentive to get into a ride that is shared.
Great, thank you. We can move on to our next question, which was from Sarah Ball. How has the inclusion of telework moved us forward, and taking those cars off the road during those times helped with decreasing vehicle use?
Has not. The problem is that people still are making occasional, much longer trips to work, you know, maybe once a week, twice a week, but they're moving further away. So it's a kind of a land use combined with transportation. And it turns out that people that are telecommuting often use the car during the day for doing various things. And so the net change in VMT is not very great, you know, all the evidence so far. So it's good for reducing congestion because they're not driving at peak hours on the road, but it's not necessarily good from a VMT, you know, vehicle usage perspective.
Yeah, there are also studies showing that when you work from home, you tend to do a lot more short trips that add up to perhaps comparable vehicle miles traveled overall. So it's a little disconcerting. There's an assumption that working from home reduces how many miles you drive, but that's not necessarily true. There needs to be some more research on that to make sure that that's how it's going to play out.
I think the other thing we've noticed from Cruz's end is that while the telework has moved forward, people who do need to get to work, everyone is now riding in their personal vehicles. And so risky behavior has actually increased in the last year or so. And so that is something to take into account while we're thinking about vehicle use. And then, of course, the rebound of travel once, you know, in this sort of post-pandemic world that we're starting to see come to bear. So I think it's great that there is an optionality, but we're actually seeing like additional personal vehicle usage, then thereby kind of increasing a lot of the risks that are associated with that.
Great. Thank you all. To make sure that we're keeping check on time, we have about 15 minutes left. So I'll focus on folks that haven't asked a question quite yet going forward. And certainly if only one or two of the panelists would like to respond, that would maximize the number of questions we get to. So our second question is from Gal City. And she asks, as a parent with young children, I need car seats in the vehicle for their safety, also space for strollers, bags, etc. This is a big obstacle for me taking Uber and Lyft, and I see it as being a serious hurdle for shared autonomous vehicles in general. How can resolve this issue? I would also add disability access is also something that needs to be considered moving forward, especially given legal requirements, ADA, Americans with Disability Act, etc. So one of our panelists would like to take that question.
Sure, I'll take it first this time around. Thank you. I am actually a parent of two young children, so I appreciate this question very much and had the struggles as well with getting them in and around. I think the benefit of having sort of a fleet managed system like Cruz versus Lyft and Uber, and I am speaking from being a former Lyft employee, is that you can sort of control what we're able to test and control sort of what is the ability to get to meet some community needs where they are at. The Origin is actually being designed to consider some sort of car seat anchors. There's an exploration of wave variant. Can't see it here, but hopefully we can maybe share it in the chat. Maybe one of my colleagues can share it in the chat. Vision of the internal side of the Origin. There's going to be an immense amount of space for bags, for strollers, et cetera, just given that the fact that the cabin is going to be larger. So some of those opportunities that for communities and for parents like probably a lot of us here are going to be able to afford to get into that, in addition to the fact we're probably the first AV company to sort of be out in front to say that we're exploring a wave variant. We actually have an accessibility manager at Cruz who is a user and actually able to materially define how we are exploring that variant, whether it's about curb height, whether it's ramp height, where are the anchors, how to feel secure, are there a transition from a wheelchair to a seat? What about rolling just motorized wheelchairs? So we're really trying to explore this and take that in from like the ground up, which I think a lot of other optionalities for ride sharing have not been able to do thus far.
And I would just add to that as we build up market share, there's a lot of people using it and the vehicles can be more specialized. So even today with Uber, you can press a button if you want Spanish speaking, if you want, wheelchair accessible. They already have 5 or 6 buttons that you can press. And so this, if you have young kids and you want child seat, you press the button for that and there'll be enough of a market, enough vehicles that they can specialize like that.
Great, thank you. So our next question comes from June Park. Are there any efforts or projects implementing automated vehicle technology in off-road sectors?
Well, that's kind of where it started, in mining operation. This is not what that person was referring to, but, in mines, these big trucks, most of those are automated and remote controlled. And so in kind of dangerous and off-road conditions, but this person was probably thinking more about off-road vehicles. And I don't think there's been as much thought on that, except in very controlled circumstances. I mean, you could think of it as a campus as being off-road. It's not really, but within a campus or within a geo-fenced area, you can do that actually pretty easily.
Yeah, and as Brian points out, the Long Beach Container Terminal is doing it. We actually have Bonnie Nixon, Long Beach Container Terminal here. They're doing it. They've been doing it for years. And right, Bonnie, you guys are. It's all successful. It's pretty impressive the way those automated vehicles move around that yard, that terminal, moving containers very quickly, very efficiently, with no pollution.
Yes, that's true. We have automatic guided vehicles. They're made in Germany. The battery packs come from Denmark, and we have over 100 of them that pretty much just take the chassis from the ships to the truck stacks and the rail yard. We have a dedicated rail yard as well. So yeah, we are the first sort of fully automated terminal, quite frankly, probably one of the greenest terminals in the world. And I'm right now doing all the emissions, and we've been able to do that as it's been under construction from 2015 till we're finishing our final stages of battery exchange buildings and all kinds of things this coming year. And we've gone from, we've seen the productivity increases we could get with zero emissions. We no longer have diesel operated cranes or vehicles.
And Bonnie, it's not without its controversy, right? I mean, the labor union, ILWU, is very concerned about automation at the ports. And you guys struck a deal with them, and you made it happen, which was, foresightful and cutting edge. But, just today, I think there was a bill that was considered in the legislature about trying to, protect jobs from automation and automated vehicles. That is a concern for people. So we can't completely ignore, the labor aspects of it, and where are these truck drivers if we have automated trucks, what are they going to do, and how are we going to address that? And I don't want to get into the whole thing over the ILWU and the terminal owners and operators, because it's a big ugly mess, but it is a line in the sand issue for labor at the moment down at the ports. So it's a complicated thing.
It is a complicated, and it is a labor contract negotiation year. And I think our experience has been different. We've actually had a 20% increase in hiring with ILWU because our productivity has we've gone from 700,000 TEU is the 20-foot equivalent of a container to 3.3 million. And so along with that comes a lot more work and a lot more productivity. And so it's been a different experience on the ground, but for sure there's a sort of a perception that it's one or the other. And I mean, for me, being the head of sustainability here, it upsets me when the economy is pitted against the environment. It does not need to be so. And
so, Bonnie, we have to move on because we are almost out of time. I think we have time for just one more question and one answer. And if it can be very simple, that would be appreciated. And of course, it happens to be a very complicated question, which is, we've got a couple about environmental impacts. So considering where the electricity comes from our grid, as well as battery recycling issues, what are some of the possible ramifications that we need to consider? How do we address those going forward? And if one of you can respond, that would be great. And then we'll end our discussion.
Well, just a quick comment is, with electricity or hydrogen, we are decarbonizing electricity. We are decarbonizing it, and that's a trend everywhere in the world. A little blip here with the Ukraine problem, but basically that's the trajectory. So electric vehicles is, even if you have a fair amount of coal in the mix, is still better than a gasoline or diesel vehicle. So I think the benefit is just going to keep growing over time. And you can't postpone vehicle electrification waiting, because there's long lag times here. And so moving on vehicles, even if you have coal in your mix, is the smart thing to do.
Chris, I know you only said one additional, but I have a 30-second addition there. I think, Cruz is extremely excited about being renewable, completely renewable powered. So we're not responsible for sort of the additional upstream emissions generated on the grid. And we're really excited as we think about longer term and the future of these vehicles actually being able to charge strategically to even better take advantage of renewable power. Like, for example, our charging behavior can be tailored to periods of high renewable generation, like in the middle of the day, to time with peak solar, and figuring out some of those opportunities that may, be able to further complement versus sort of taking it away. So
great.
Promise 30 seconds.
Hey, thank you so much. And thank you everybody for your questions. Unfortunately, we couldn't get to all of them. So I have noted each one of those questions, and I can share those with the panelists and see if they can, think about them, provide a response or whatnot. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Brian for some concluding remarks.
Yeah, I just want to, if you guys, so Brian Sheridan, I'm the development director at the Coalition for Clean Air, and I just thank you, Professor Sterling and Dr. Liu and Prashanthi. You guys are amazing. If you guys liked it, just weighing in the comments, give them, use your reaction button. I tried to encourage everybody earlier, but now's your time to do the little clappy thing. Yeah, like Chris did, but use your computer for it. So if you guys, I'm putting something in the chat, and we've got a really, in addition to the air quality awards, we are going to do our second clean air speed networking event. And so it was a lot of fun the first time. It's May 17th. And I know there's a lot of folks on here that have expertise in many of the technologies we talked about. So, it's a little different. People jump around from room to room. Please think about coming to that. And, please do also join us at the California Air Quality Awards. We have some amazing, very deserving honorees, CEC Commissioner Patty Monahan, Volvo Group North America, and Naila Pope Hardin from Climate Plan. It's going to be a great event. It's in Los Angeles. It is June 17th. So, and tickets are tax deductible. So come network. Thank you again to Cruzs for making this possible. This is I'm not even sure, I think the 6th or 7th in our series. All of these recordings can be found on our website under the event tab. So if you guys want to check out some of the other really interesting topics. And the last thing I'm just going to say is one of the cool things about these events is that so many of our panelists are actually experts. So just watching the chat is really fascinating to me. Thank you, Ben Wong, for correcting the congestion pricing versus road charge. Of course, we saw Bonnie just jumping in. So I hope to see you guys. Thank you to my boss. Thank you, Eric. Thanks, Chris, you guys, and Prashanthi and Dr. Sperling and Professor Sperling. Please join us again. We're going to do a lot of these. And if you're not following us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook, please do so. Joe?
You said it all, Brian. The only thing I'll add is I add to every event that we host. May every breath you take be a breath of clean air. Thank you for all you guys are doing to make sure that happens.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Dr. Sperling. Thank you, Prashanthi. And thank you, Joe.